everyone. Welcome to Writings, Chats, and Friends. And I want to tell you, we have a wonderful friend with us today, and we're all so pleased to have been able to meet such an individual. This is Keith McHenry. You might have heard of Food Not Bombs, or you also might have heard of Keith dedicating his entire life to helping the more needy, the homeless, the unfortunate. And he's done some remarkable things, but we sure need to talk to him about homelessness, especially being he has an anniversary that just passed. So I think that's wonderful. So welcome to the show, Keith.
Thanks for having us. That's beautiful, Monica and Kenneth. That's cool. Great. Thanks.
Every word's true. Now, joining me today also is Mr. Kenneth Ween.
Morning.
And we have Celeste Duckworth. And Celeste is one of our new co-hosts, and we're so happy to have her joining us also. She always brings another perspective on things that we don't even think about a lot of times.
Beautiful.
So hi, Celeste.
Hi.
Can I understand you had something to read?
Yes, we like to start off our program as often as possible with something of writings. And today I have chosen a poem by Maritza Rivera, a Puerto Rican poet and an Army veteran and a winner of a number of awards. And in keeping with Keith's dedication to feeding the hungry and making a world that is more verdant and peaceful, I'd like to read Maritza Rivera's poem, Day-Old Bread. Some say poetry is like bread, that it feeds the soul. But oftentimes that's not enough. It's been proven that children cannot learn on empty stomachs. Look at all the underperforming schools in our country. Breakfast should be the first lesson of each day, followed by lunch and an afternoon snack before dismissal. Feeding tubes for the dying force people to live, sometimes against their will, but usually not for long. And although there are no feeding tubes for the living, one meal can make the difference between life and death for so many. Yet while people die of starvation each day, thousands of pounds of food are discarded on a daily basis in this affluent country of ours. Shame on me. Shame on you. Shame on all of us who turn up our noses at leftovers and day-old bread that, like poetry, can feed thousands.
Isn't that the truth?
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
We don't.
It's crazy, though, isn't it, Ken, that there is an abundance of food that we throw away, and we have people starving. How crazy is it?
Yeah. I know, Keith, during the, if I remember correctly, during the last election in November, you were out feeding people in line while they were waiting. Is that correct?
Yeah, we were organizing that. And the odd thing is that the Georgia government just passed a law banning you from doing that.
Yeah.
And that's one of the places we were doing it was in Georgia. So I think that's kind of telling. But it's also sad that people could wait that long to vote and go hungry, and just because it's like a whole day of being in line to vote. That's just incredible. I guess maybe sometimes in Iraq or Afghanistan when there's one of these kind of US-backed elections, it might be the same idea, but traditionally in democratic countries, you don't need to stand in line, and you don't need to be fed in line, and you don't need to have a law against feeding people trying to vote. Those are all insane.
You know what, historically, it's almost hysterically funny, because there was a time during which elections were actually the candidates would feed people, and the voting was actually done very publicly.
Yeah.
And they would gather in the square, and one candidate would be on one side of the square, the other, and they both have their food and their beer and everything. And okay, who wants to vote for this guy? Who wants to vote for that guy? And they separate. And one of the people who took part in such elections was a fellow you might have heard of from history, a fellow named Abe Lincoln.
Yeah.
So, and now today we have, well, sadly, one political party, the Republican Party, that are trying to, as you say, no, you shouldn't be fed while you're standing there. We want to make you suffer, and you can't vote by mail. You have to suffer to vote, because by doing that, we can get you to not vote.
Yeah. Well, unlike Mayor Curley, when he was in federal prison in Rhode Island, he had his people, according to my grandmother who lived in Dorchester, they just walked up Dorchester Avenue and handed a dollar bill to every single person.
Oh, yeah.
Get your vote that way.
James Michael Curley, mayor of Boston, who was in federal jail for taking the civil service exam for somebody else, as I remember. He was a character and a half.
Yeah, very popular with those that received a dollar.
Yes.
In those days, a dollar was a lot more.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It might be like handing out at least a 20 right now, not 100. But yeah, that's the politics in the United States, that's for sure. Well, one of the anniversaries that's coming, so we just finished, as you referred to, the 1-year anniversary of being every single day sharing free food during the COVID crisis. And the first 100 days or so, there was virtually no food and no drinking water, no hand washing station, no free masks. None of those things existed for the roughly 2,000 people that lived outside in Santa Cruz. And it took for months before they started organizing some kind of way to feed people in what were considered sanctioned camps by the city and the county, of which still 1,000 people just weren't even able to access those, maybe even more. So that was the 1-year anniversary. Now another anniversary is coming up this Friday, which will be the 40th anniversary of the first Food Not Bombs soup line. And entitled, I have a program I'm going to be doing at 6 o'clock Pacific Standard Time on Zoom, if I can figure out how to do it. Hopefully it will. Reminding people that on March 26th of 1981, there were very few unhoused people in the United States. And the founders of Food Not Bombs, which I was one of, were doing street theater around the issue of Seabrook Nuclear Power Station, against the war in El Salvador, against the nuclear arms race, those kind of things. And we were founded on the night of May 24th, 1980, when the 8 of us had bailed one of our friends out of, well, 7 of us had bailed out a friend, Brian Feigenbaum, and had come back and said, we're going to do bake sales to raise money to pay back the person that gave us the money to bail Brian out from an arrest that happened on the May 24th occupation attempt at Seabrook. And so we had very poor response from our bake sale. We're trying to, I forget how much money, but it just seemed daunting to do it through bake sales. And I had a moving company called Smooth Move, and I moved a family, and they were throwing out a poster by the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom called "Wouldn't It Be a Beautiful Day If the Schools Had All the Money They Needed and the Air Force had to hold a bake sale to buy a bomber." So we bought some military uniforms at the Central Square Army Navy surplus store, took that sign out and did our bake sales, claiming we were trying to buy a bomber. And of course, I had long hair and beard just like now, only it was red. And people would laugh, and we really didn't make any more money, but we learned something very powerful about that this street theater, this humorous idea on the street, actually got people to slow down. And in Harvard Square, people just rush right by you, wouldn't even talk to you. But by this technique, we had success. So then we thought we'd do a street performance outside the stockholders meeting of the Bank of Boston. We would dress like hobos. We'd we would make a big pot of soup, and we would made a flyer and everything saying, first of all, that the interlocking board of directors of the Bank of Boston were also on the, they were board members on Raytheon, on the Lockheed Martin, General Electric, and they were also on the board of the company that was both buying Seabrook Nuclear Power Station, and they were on the board selling this power station. So they were basically double dipping or triple, quadruple dipping. And so we made this huge amount of soup, and we didn't feel like we did adequate promotion to get a line of people. So I went to the Pine Street Inn, a shelter that was at those days on Pine Street that had remained from the Great Depression. And about midnight, I gave a little speech to the guys sitting back those days. They didn't have beds. You sat on a tile floor or tile bench. And I told them about the protest. They were all excited. Wow, it's a protest like the 60s. They were really into it. And sure enough, a soup line assembled on Atlantic Avenue outside the Federal Reserve Bank. And people were shocked because this is a little over 30 days after the inauguration of Ronald Reagan. And so there was some anticipation that neoliberal structural adjustment or trickle-down economics was going to be implemented. And it was. And our flyer was saying, if these policies of this bank and of the Reagan administration continue and we don't fight back and stop them, there'll be a future in America where people will have to stand in line to get food at a soup kitchen, and that people will be living outside in the streets like in the Great Depression in shanties. And of course, people were shocked. That will never happen. And some people were pretty angry that we were suggesting this as a possibility. But the message of my presentation is actually that we can remember 40 years ago this week that we did not have a housing crisis in the United States. We didn't have tent cities in every corner. And so it was actual intentional economic policies that we predicted would cause that did happen. And as a result, there is this huge, like millions of people living outside now in the United States, or living in temporary situations like cars, or in people's couches, or things of that nature. And it's growing. And we're about to see a tsunami. We already, for the first time in all that I've been out, I stood outside almost every day for the last year feeding people. And we just started getting that flood of evicted individuals. So this month already, we had 6 people who told us they just lost their places. Some actually had vehicles, fortunately. One was a person who was burned out of his house during the forest fires in the summer. And now the police actually came into the bedroom of the apartment he was renting and removed him into the streets, and the landlord locked all of his belongings into his house, and they were searching for safe parking places where you wouldn't get ticketed and ultimately towed. And now our city here in Santa Cruz, like many, has a very aggressive campaign of, if you look unhoused, they might ticket you 2 or 3 times in a day until your bills are so high you can't register your vehicle. And then this gives them the legal justification to seize your only place of safety.
Oh, my word.
And many of these people, I would say this huge percentage of these people that go through this are single women in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. And then the issue becomes, where do they safely sleep outside? And so when they do the sweeps of the camps, we have to hook up people we trust, men that we trust, to find doorways with the unhoused woman for safety. And I remember the first times we were doing that about 3 years ago. It was just shocking that became our go-to thing, because there's no women's shelter here for, unless you are even if you are a victim of domestic abuse, it's still very hard to get in, and so on. And so That's the situation that we have now. So there became tent cities, and the substantial number of the individuals in these camps are women who have gone there specifically for the protection that it gives them. And yet the city continually, that we talk all about women, you know, we have a lesbian mayor here who is the most aggressive anti-homeless person possible, but goes on and on. She has her position because of an African-American politician in town was forced out for saying something, for like being frustrated that another female politician wanted to use their boardroom right away. And he's like, my constituents are still in here. And so that was considered sexual harassment. And it was basically because he was actually had attracted a huge number of students at the university here to do studies on solutions to homelessness. And he was trying to put them on the city council agenda, but that was just not tolerable. So the National Association of Realtors and others, the Department Association of California, put together a $750 million campaign to drive them out to, no, maybe it's not million, it's $750,000 to get rid of them.
Please.
Yeah.
I want to keep you focused a little bit here, and
Yep.
rather than on local politics, the national problem,
Right.
which of course it is, it's a national problem. So now let's say that Mr. Walsh, I believe it is no, who is it? Buttigieg, I guess which one
He's
is
transportation. There's Fudge is housing and urban development.
Walsh? Yeah, he was the mayor of Boston, actually.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, good guy. Well, now if you could get his ear, what would you suggest to him? Where should we be starting in unraveling this monstrous problem?
Well, there's a couple. I think on the most basic level is that we need an eviction moratorium just to slow, and a real one. Mm-hmm. And that some of the trillions of dollars that have been going to the banks and transnational corporations and so on certainly should be diverted to paying, to keep people in housing. And if that means like you have a mortgage that's distressed and you can't finance that anymore, that you be bailed out. That's who really needs to be bailed out. And then the other thing that had happened was that in the when the Great Depression, when it was public housing was starting to become something in the country, there was a couple of problems that happened with it, which I think anybody alive then would realize, that they didn't put resources and money into maintaining public housing. They built public housing, then they became decrepit during that time. And then the other thing was that there was a time limit for property owners to either give up they could up with the government and continue the public housing, or they could tear the public housing down and after a certain time limit, and often like something in the area about 40 years or so. And so like with Cabrini Green in Chicago, or in the Columbia Point housing projects, which I was bringing food to in the early 80s, which was controlled by the Black Liberation Army, actually. It's a very huge towering buildings, but the plumbing didn't work, electricity didn't work. It became like an essentially abandoned place where a lot of people were living, but they were living in kind of a post-apocalyptic atmosphere. And so that could have been done. And also having these giant housing projects, which is a very big 50s, 60s type thing, would have been better to have much smaller places and more like community size housing, and a lot more of them. But right now we are in a situation where we have probably some cases 10 to 20 empty units for every unhoused person in the United States. So that is, in fact, if you go to the Port Authority and Hell's Kitchen, you can see on the Hudson River side of the Port Authority that there are these huge luxury condominiums, probably 50 stories, and they have the fading luxury condos for sale banners that are falling off the tops of these buildings. And there's nobody living in these buildings. And you have hundreds of people living in blue tarps around the base of these buildings. And that is emblematic of the policy that's happening. So like in Santa Cruz, for instance, there's maybe I think 7 large luxury condo projects happening. They're trying to build a low income housing for 20 people. They have another one that in another 4 or 5 years will come online with 120 people. But we're probably getting in an area of 100 to 200 unhoused people joining the community every single month.
Now, what percentage do you think, Keith, of the people who are homeless could, if they had the financial wherewithal so that were given a place to live, how many of them would be able to maintain themselves in that place because, are able to take care of themselves, are able to, feed themselves, etc.? How many of them are housing crisis and how many of them are a larger issue of mental health? Because one of the things Reagan also did, of course, you were talking about his contribution here. One of the things he did was emptying out this, basically the psych hospitals. So all those people. Yeah.
Well, I want to remind you that was our wonderful John F. Kennedy, who actually, for very good reasons, because of his, I believe, his sister, decided to that. But where Reagan's crime in this situation is part of the plan was that, and this is because of American politics with Republicans and Democrats, was to fund the halfway houses where people would get care,
right? And
they would, and that part did not happen. And part of that was because states' rights and the governor of California, and having a very conservative government here, refused to fund that, and then therefore he gets the blame. But there was, so that, but the other thing is, just imagine, and maybe sadly, everybody has had this problem, as you are descending into homelessness, you're grasping, like you're desperate. You now like are shacked up with your cousin that you can't really stand, and now you're claustrophobic in that apartment. Then you're becoming, so what amazes me is how sane the people living outside are, considering what they had gone through to get unhoused, and then what they're doing to be pushed from pillar to post. So, like, classically, we're just now entering the 18th anniversary of the war in Iraq, and Abu Ghraib is in people's minds. Well, what did the CIA do? They kept people awake, right? That's that is a technique of torture. So what do we do in our communities? We make sure that the unhoused people have to stay awake all the time. That's why people often find unhoused people sleeping outside on sidewalks and so on, is because the police have gone by all night long, waking them up, IDing them. That can happen 2 or 3 times in an evening. You have to sit there for 30, 40 minutes, an hour while they run your name. You can't get, and this happens day in and day out. So if you're unhoused for a month, you might have had not one single night's sleep. On top of that, you have vigilantes that are like throwing stuff at you in the middle of the night, that kind of stuff. So I have a friend, Paul Bowden, who started the San Francisco Coalition of the Homeless, and he does another project now for all homeless programs, homeless advocacy in the West Coast called RAP. And he makes a very clear statement. The solution to homelessness is a home.
Yeah.
And so even people, so what could potentially happen? We see this on the streets quite frequently. People are so desperate for things. In fact, we had like a conflict yesterday at our meal, because people will be hoarders. But being a hoarder outside is a real cry. That's a problem. It looks like trash. It could look, you know, it's visible, or like having a marital dispute outside. That's a whole different thing than having a marital dispute in your apartment where no one else except for maybe a close by neighbor aware. So all these things that are occurring in public are actually also occurring inside: heroin use, meth use, so on. But if a majority of people were, you know, there would be, like in 1981 in the combat zone or in South End of Boston, you would see, I remember that lady that was tied up in garbage bags that leaned against the back steps of the Boston Symphony for years and years. It turned out she'd actually wrapped, apparently when she died, they found over $250,000 cash taped to her body that she was saving. So you had that kind of situation, but you wouldn't have massive tent cities, because most of the people that ended up on the streets now are people who were evicted, lost their jobs, had some other kind of crisis like that. It's not. So I think that we make way too much of the fact that, and then people that might have been completely appeared sane at their job and so on, but now just lost, you know, when the COVID happened, even the most sane of those living outside were losing the plot completely because of people that, you know, everybody was losing, you know, was freaking out. So that rubbed off, and that was, you know, kind of a huge mental health crisis for us as we tried to share food outside and deal with people that were basically like melting down completely. And
Monica, you and Rich were in effect homeless.
Yeah.
For a while. I mean, and that of course was due to a fire, and you ended up living in. You were quote lucky in that you were living in a barn, a converted barn. You know, somebody from work.
Milk barn, yeah.
Yeah.
I know how it felt to be homeless, because for 2 days, and this is only 2 days, and it was traumatic. We had to, all our animals and ourselves were in a car, nowhere to go. We did park in a parking lot, and then I won't name the name of the store, complained about it. So they made all the people leave, all these homeless people after the fire. So I know how it feels, and I just know that any type of shelter at that point was wonderful. We were so grateful for it. And there are so many empty buildings. There are so many places where we could home people. Absolutely. Why aren't we doing this?
Well, I think one of the ideas I saw recently was empty malls. Now, Celeste, you're up in Phoenix, and I'm going to guess there were a couple of malls up there that were certainly emptying when I was there a couple of years back. And they would be wonderful. You have the food courts, which lend themselves so beautifully to providing kitchen facilities. You have fairly big bathrooms. The only thing you have to actually add are some showers. And then you could divide the stores into sleeping areas. So for temporary shelter, it's, you know, one of the things that really horrifies me is that in this country is that we do have the potential to give people homes, or at least shelter. We also have the ability to build, you know, take over areas and build tiny homes. And I saw something the other day, I think it was in San Francisco, where they were bringing in pre-made homes. And it was they were really sounded pretty good, but the unions were complaining because, well, you don't have a licensed plumber from our union hooking this up because it was done over in this place. And so therefore you shouldn't be able to use these.
Oh my word.
And, you know, I see something going on. There's a theme here that goes on and on and on, which is that money is always put ahead of helping.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things, is so I was homeless for a couple of years when I was raising my little one. But luckily I lived in Stockton, California, so I could go and pick onions and whatever to keep a little change in my pocket and to have something to eat. And so this is always something that's kind of close to my heart.
Mhm.
The problem that I see, because in Phoenix, we're a nonprofit I volunteer for, we've been helping a couple of homeless people. But I see that there's a twofold problem. I'm always trying to educate my neighborhood about the homeless. Most people, all they see is the bad stuff. They see the drug addicts, they see the mentally ill that they can't, that Community Bridges is here, can't do anything with. They see the criminals who actually prey on the homeless people that are homeless too. So when the neighborhood sees that, it makes it very hard to help the ones that are ready to be off the streets, the ones that are actually working, the ones that maybe just got evicted that are on the street. And 9 times out of 10, the city wants to push everybody downtown. They want to push all the homeless people downtown to the shelters that don't have enough room.
Already.
Yeah, so they want to push them. But the problem is when they do a count, they'll never have an accurate count because there's so many homeless camps all around the metro area, in the alleys. They know where to go and hide. They're not going to be, and some of these people are families who have got evicted and just feel safe in the neighborhood they lived in.
Yeah.
So they're not going to go anywhere, and I always tell people, a lot of people are not going to go in the shelters because the shelters are dangerous. My son got beat up. A lot of people have gotten beat up. The shelters are not very sanitary, so a lot of people get sick, and they just feel safer in the street. Okay, my mom worked in the Reagan era for a mental health institution in Ohio, and her job was to try to find housing for the ones that were being kicked out. And the problem with that, she said, is the first place you go is you try to find family. A lot of family will put their people at that time in the mental institution and move out of state.
Right.
And there's no one, there's no family. And then what they were doing is, so they were giving them their money in their pocket, and they would get on the bus and just travel all across the country. My mom used to say, how to spot a mental health patient if they're going across country. Well, at the time, Greyhound always gives the sales. And she says, if they're traveling from the East Coast to the West Coast and they have no luggage, that's it.
Yeah.
Because her job was also to go get them back when they run out of money and bring them back to their state. So I think in a way, we're helping one guy here who actually grew up here, mother died, became homeless. But he gets up every morning and goes to work down at the tire shop. And we have seen him do that for almost a year. We decided to help him. The business owners decided to try to help him with jobs, very good at working jobs and stuff like that, but not ready to get a regular job. I had people say, well, he can go here, he can go here. I'm like, he's been on the street for 2 years. There's some mental issues. There's the issue of, do I really want to get another place to stay, or do I just want to stay out here? So those are some of the real life battles. But we do have a homeless apartment complex that was built in our area, partly funded by the Native American Connection, that's doing very well. But really, they understood more about there needed to be just more than giving housing. There's counselors over there. There's a social worker over there. They have laundry facilities. They have a health facility over there, and they even have their own garden over there. And I'm telling you, in the last 3 years, they have kept it immaculate, because the homeless people that live there, they're on a plan and they have to be part of everything that goes on there. And I wish we had more. I think we have like 5 places I know of in Phoenix that do very well.
Celeste, you mentioned that garden, and that brings up something very important in my mind, which is that when you give homeless people a place to live, as Keith was saying, and you build this big tower and don't maintain it,
right,
it's not a home anyway. They're still homeless. They just have a roof. But when you give people a real home, it means they have an investment, an emotional and sweat equity, if nothing else.
Right.
That garden represents a lot more than helping to feed them, which of course
Right.
is immediately the first thing you say. But even if they're growing stuff that isn't edible, even if they're just growing flowers or something,
Right.
the fact that it's theirs,
Right.
that they now have a sense of ownership in the best sense. The best estimates I've seen in public are that there are about 500,000 homeless people in America. I don't believe that number. Do you?
No. And I just read a report that Seattle has jumped in homelessness, like what Mr. McHenry said, as far as the whole thing with COVID and people just getting put out. Even though we had a moratorium, landlords were still kicking people out.
So,
Yeah.
And
Keith,
no one, I don't know anyone that's not living, people used to say paycheck to paycheck. You're not even living paycheck to paycheck anymore, okay? It can take one day in the hospital can kick you out of your apartment.
Yeah.
And so that's the issue we have. And the other issue we have is that everyone wants to be the one that conquers homelessness, but nobody wants to come together like the city, like every mayor and every mayor in Arizona should be in a homeless committee and talk about how we're going to conquer homeless.
No.
Or every governor or whatever.
And every mayor in Arizona and every mayor in every state.
Absolutely.
Homeless for a while.
Absolutely. Right. Yeah, absolutely. So this is the issue.
They do committees brilliantly.
Right. It's the issue we talk about over at the nonprofit. Now we decided that we're going to have some community days because the homeless have grown in our neighborhood alone. Okay, we have the shanties and stuff in our neighborhood alone now. So we said, and I'm gonna tell you, I really believe right now that we're in a state that this is now communities and neighbors are going to have to get up and say, how are we going to help the situation? No longer is it just a political situation and just for the mayors. Communities got to come together and say, how are we going to deal with this?
Yes.
On Indian School, the owners have got together and they had a big plot of land there and they have allowed them to live on the land, but someone has to keep it clean. They actually went and got tents. And it's, and to some people it's like, well, that's not enough. But you know what? It's enough for right now.
It's a beginning.
It's a beginning. Right. It's a beginning.
The journey of 1,000 miles. A single step.
Right.
Monica?
The problem that I have seen, here we have a lot of people who are homeless, but they were given, let's say, a shed or a small trailer. So what they've done is they've gone to empty lots. Mm-hmm. Now, instead of anyone realizing that, these people lost their homes in a fire, they didn't have insurance or whatever, they were underinsured. And this is all they can do right now. What they're doing is the people who also went through this fire want them out. They're doing everything in their power to get them out of the lots that they're temporarily on.
Right.
Yeah.
And they care more about property value, appearance, than helping these people who are eventually going to be okay because they're all waiting for their settlements to come in, which is taking years.
Keith,
I don't understand how people can be so heartless.
Keith, you had something you wanted to add.
Yeah, well, with the Paradise Fire, which is what you're referring to, was to me was astounding how brutal, how quickly there was all this media about we got to help the Paradise Fire victims and everything and all this goodwill. And then with less than 30 days, they became the bad homeless. Yeah. And when Loma Prieta happened I was feeding people in San Francisco, and they actually used the term, the city officials used the term when they put people in Moscone Center, they said the good homeless on the first floor, all the bad homeless in the basement. So if you were homeless before the earthquake, you were the bad homeless. You were the good homeless after the earthquake if you were made. And then what was the solution? If you happen to be from the Marina, which is a wealthy neighborhood in San Francisco, the Hilton, the Marriott, the Hyatt, they all, if you could show you had an ID that showed an address in a wealthy neighborhood, they put you up in a hotel.
Oh my word. And they're the ones that need it less.
Yeah. And then all the
Anyone
other,
else?
the rest of the people that were made homeless but were low income, but were not the bad homeless yet because they had only been homeless for a month or so, were placed in a military ship with a curfew underneath the Bay Bridge. So you see this constantly. So there was, like with our fire here, there was all this support and everything for the victims of the fire. Now those people are the bad.
Yes, that's exactly how it is here also.
Yeah, and this is and I don't, and it's incredible that could, the pandemic's still happening. You have the moratoriums are not working. You're going to have maybe now, because the moratoriums are very limited, like the one that exists till September is for housing that has a connection to federal funding. That doesn't mean, so that's where we're starting to see many more people evicted. But there is, and then you were mentioning the gardening. That was also, so we have one of our unhoused people here. He's unhoused because when he was just let onto the streets as a foster child, right? And so now he lived outside, and he is actually planting flowers and garden in a park that we have blocked an eviction, the homeless sweep from. So there was this thing called the holiday evictions, where they were going to kick 150, 200 people into doorways and into bushes and so on the longest night of the year, December 21st. And we were able to block the phase. The first phase did go through, but there's supposed to be a second phase a week later. And the community came out and physically blocked the police from evicting this camp. And then we filed a federal lawsuit the next day, the Santa Cruz Homeless Union and Food Not Bombs, and we were able to block the eviction. We're still, that injunction is still happening, but during this whole time, Blue and others are making beautiful flower beds and everything in the park that they are living in.
While they're giving back what they can.
Yeah, and then on the issue of the shelters, I think we now have maybe a total of 200 people in hotel rooms out of the thousands that we have. Very many empty hotels. Who goes on a vacation during a pandemic? Nobody. So we have all these, but the only people in our hotels are mostly construction workers who are building these luxury condos and are building other upscale hotels, while people are living outside, and that is so obviously criminal. And I think that we are seeing a massive transfer of resources to the wealthiest people at the expense of the average people. And it's becoming like a war on the streets now at this point.
It doesn't make sense anymore because there aren't enough rich people wanting these condos. Right. There really aren't enough rich people to fill these hotels. We're building things because we have created a Ponzi scheme. Yeah. It is the Ponzi. I call our economy a Ponzi scheme economy. We just keep putting money into the rich people who then buy things that drive up the value of those things and separate them from the rest of us, and especially from those of us who have the least. Yeah. And we are creating a world. Years ago, I went with a very good friend of mine to India. And I remember the first time driving from the airport to actually one of his relatives' homes where I stayed in Mumbai, and seeing the people living on the streets in cardboard shacks along the streets and things, and thinking, oh my God, how do we help these people? How do we help this country to get past this? Now I'm seeing that happening here. It is no longer how do we Americans help the people in India. It's how do we Americans help the people in America. And it's so sad.
But we
And
can house every single person in this country.
Right.
So, for instance, we have one luxury condo that was completed maybe 4 years ago. It is not even half occupied.
right.
We have another one that's another condo at the other end of our main street, Pacific Avenue, that is also not even near half occupied. Yet they're building 7 more 7-story luxury condos, and that will remain empty. And
For
you
their
could
tax write-off. Yeah.
yeah, and so there's a really good
Oh,
book on this issue called Home Wrecker, and it
Mm.
goes. So you may have. So I remember, like in 2007, I was at like a conference, and my roommate in this hotel was just described how she had they had called 1-800-HOPE. It was after Obama came into office, actually. So it was right after he was inaugurated, and they started that program called 1-800-HOPE. And they said, oh, yeah, well, just don't pay your mortgage for 2 months and we'll help you. Well, then I come to find out that they told over 5 million, nearly 6 million people called 1-800-HOPE, didn't pay their mortgage for 2 months, and their houses were confiscated ultimately by people like Steve Mnuchin. There's a number, there's the former, what is he, Secretary of Treasury, I guess.
Treasury.
And he so the same kind of, so that's happening now on a much larger scale than it did in the 2007.
Bait and switch. What else is that?
Yeah, and it's going to be, it seems like it's, we're starting to see that cities are using even armored vehicles to sweep homeless camps. We saw that in Bellingham, where they brought in a Bearcat and riot police to clear camps. People were injured in Sacramento. There's still a bunch of lawsuits going on with people that were badly brutalized and beaten during.
My word.
We
using, and that's after the campfire,
to do another program, Monica and Celeste.
We do. We need to do another one.
Policing in America.
I want Keith, though, to tell the people who are listening, is there any, can they contact you if they're interested in being a branch of your organization? How can they reach you?
Or help your organization?
Yeah, we have a website, foodnotbombs.net, and we're currently active in at least 1,000 cities. Right now, we have 5 or 6 chapters in Myanmar that are fighting against the military coup. It's incredible to see their photos and the amount of food they're getting out, even under these dire situations. We have groups in India. We have groups in Latin America, all over Europe. The Lebanese, the Beirut chapter is struggling because that economy has completely collapsed.
Yeah.
And we've been trying to get them money, but the only way you can get them money is to actually have somebody give US dollars to somebody who lands in Beirut or drives somehow across the border into Lebanon to hand them the cash, because it's just not possible to. If you wire the money, it goes into the Lebanese lira and it just disappears. So we have groups in Nigeria that are struggling with the collapsing. You may have seen like videos of food warehouses being looted there because of the desperation. So this kind of confiscation of resources by the super rich is a global crisis, and our chapters are trying to organize around that. So that you can reach us at foodnotbombs.net. Now on there is the hunger hotline when you go to the locations page, and I get swamped with calls from all over the country, and there's recently been a huge crisis of some nature in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where the police sweeps from under some overpasses where people were staying warm, and the police were confiscating their firewood. And And so we're on the front lines of these homeless sweeps, which the CDC says are completely, a great way to spread COVID in the community.
Yes.
Fortunately, we've had the only COVID problems that we've had with the unhoused community, sadly, has been in the shelters. And one of our officers, Crystal, who is also a full-time employee and a full-time student, she got COVID at her management job, which is she was the night watch person for a homeless shelter at the Vets Hall here in Santa Cruz. But fortunately, a lot of people living outside that are not indoors have been doing better. I know in Phoenix, I was reading that Phoenix Food Not Bombs had posted an article of over 500 unhoused people dying in the Phoenix area. That to me was like shocking that would happen.
It is.
Because we are running out of time, Monica, you're going to be posting a link on the description of the show.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
Folks, Keith says it so quickly because it's part of his identity. So I'm going to just mention that website again. It's foodnotbombs.net.
Yes.
Right.
Food
And
not
please
bombs.
reach out, get involved in this, because I want to tell every one of you, the majority of you are only a paycheck away from joining the homeless.
Yes.
Absolutely. We also have a National Union of the Homeless, which I was involved in back in the 80s when it first started, and I'm on the executive board of that again. And so that you could reach me at foodnotbombs.net to find out how to start your own local homeless union. We've been working up in Chico, actually. One of our allies from Link TV, I think, helped make a video about the tragedy of people being burned out. So many of those people from the campfire were forced back home, so to speak, to Santa Cruz, which they had left because of how expensive it was here. And now we have unhoused friends who lost their place in that campfire and a Paradise Fire, and are now down here being harassed by the police for living outside.
Exactly.
And can't get a break. And they owned a place. They had a house only a little over 2 years ago, and now
I could be one of them, Keith.
Yeah.
Thank God we knew someone who sheltered us.
Yeah. So this is we've got to all pull together. But I do an optimistic. So we remember that there was almost no unhoused people 40 years ago. That could happen again if there's political will. And hopefully the eviction tsunami will result in a pushback that is major, and that there will be, if we had the minimum wage was raised to $15 an hour, if there was a cancellation on student debts, if there was things like Medicare for all. I was homeless 5 times from medical emergencies. Every one of my stints of homelessness was a direct result of a medical crisis.
And that is, what? Why don't we set up another interview?
Yeah, I think we're going to.
I would like to cover the medical aspect there.
And the policing. We have many, many topics. Luckily for us today, folks, you have had the chance to listen to Keith McHenry. He has been a friend of Monica and mine. Now I hope of Celeste as well. But he's been a friend of ours for years. And it's always so informative to have you join us, Keith. We'd love to have you back to all these many topics. And folks, you've been listening to Writings, Chats, and Friends. And please tell your friends about the show. If you find this interview informative and riveting, as I do, please tell other people. Help get word out. The more listeners we have for the show, the more we can help get word of so many worthwhile efforts and so many approaches and solutions and at least awareness of problems. Today, again, we've been talking with Keith McHenry, who is from Food Not Bombs a very, very important and meaningful effort.
And I hope to come back when I have my, I'm getting pretty close to my book, fourth book being finished.
Oh, yeah.
Of course.
So I'd love to introduce that at the next show.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, anytime, my friend.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Keith.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Keith.
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
He sat cross-legged on the sidewalk. A far-off look was in his eyes. In his hands, he held a piece of cardboard as everyone walked by. The sign read USMC Veteran. I'm not myself, please pray for me. So I stopped and said, you fought to save my freedom. What can I do? What do you need? He said, I'd like to shower off these painful memories, get a shave and a pair of new jeans, a meal I don't have to eat alone. Find a place to let my guard down, a real bed instead of hard ground, maybe an address and a phone. I know I've made it back, but I'm not home. He said, I saw a mortar take my best friend. In an instant he was gone. I don't sleep, I bawl my eyes out in the middle of the night. Can't let it go, I can't move on. Wish I could shower off these painful memories, get a shave and a pair of new jeans, a meal I don't have to eat alone. Find a place to let my guard down, a real bed instead of hard ground, maybe an address and a phone. I know I've made it back, but I'm not home. He handed back a 20 that I stuffed into his coat. He said, you took the time to listen, that's what I needed most. One day I'll shower off these painful memories, get a shave and a pair of new jeans, find a way to clear these minefields from my mind. Recognize the face in the mirror, see the man who used to be there. I may be down, but I've got